Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. And I am joined by James Krake. As you can see, he calls himself the cyberpunk guy. He is
Aspirational.
yeah, it's something to aspire to at least. You got 5 novels out, is that
Yeah,
correct? And you
as
just
of
put out
Monday.
one, right?
This is
There
my
it
latest
is.
book. It's out on Monday, Gamma Coin. I'll get the link into the description. We can talk about that later after the main subject. I hate overshilling.
Sure, sure. Well, James has I know watched at least one video on this channel, and I've talked
Quite a
about
few.
him before, and we decided to get together and talk a little bit about prose and editing and some things we think that indie authors really need to keep in mind. And let's be honest, a lot of them don't. You're probably going to hear the word prose more than you've ever heard it in your life before in the next half hour or so. So look forward to that. But James, I did want to give you a chance to defend yourself against an accusation that has been made to me several times, which is that you deliberately court controversy. So what do you have to say about that before we get started?
I think that's a slight misrepresentation of I will deliberately play things up in my videos for entertainment purposes. Anyone who's talked with me in chats on the very non-controversial, non-confrontational, and I try to get along with people generally. But this is YouTube. If you want to get noticed, you have to be entertaining. You have to be a little bombastic. You have to focus on the worst aspects of things that you're complaining about.
Yeah, I can see the merit in that, and I know that a lot of people don't like that, but sometimes you play the game, sometimes the game plays you. I don't know, something like that. What do the kids say these days? I might be too old for that kind of
I
talk.
I would have to leave my basement to know that.
Well, fair, fair. I definitely did not see you do that recently. Okay, so let's talk about prose. I know you've reviewed a bunch of different books and commented on the prose. And I think one of the more interesting ones was Pride and Prejudice. We talked a little bit about that. But do you think that something like that, which feels like it's trying to almost simulate conversation, has a role to play in storytelling? Or
Certainly.
do you think we've really moved past that as a device for storytelling?
I don't think we will ever move past a storytelling device. I think we are actually opening up new avenues, and I challenge anyone listening to come up with a good way to format text messages.
Hmm. That is, yeah, that would be really difficult, wouldn't it?
I struggle with that like every time I write science fiction because imagine communicating without sending text messages to people not present.
Yeah.
Like it's just part of reality now. But are you saying that in a text? Like, should that be in line? Should you break that out separately? Like, is it dialogue? Can you tell an entire story through like a Discord chat room without it
Yeah.
looking like eye cancer?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think changing technology will raise a lot of issues like that. And I think the novel as a medium has unique hurdles because I know that like movies and even comics have really easily integrated texting into their
Mhm.
storytelling. But a novel, how would you do that? Hmm.
You probably could do like explicit formatting, like breaking it into a line, almost like a script. But the
Hmm.
question is, would readers accept that? And that often that's the real question is not what is objectively best, but it's what will readers accept. If you go into the lit RPG genre and you don't include character sheets in their little blue boxes, no one will take you seriously because that's what
Right.
those readers are looking for. And that's obviously using the paradigm of video game mechanics to show action and tension and growth of power, which if you rewind the clock 200 years, no one would have ever imagined something like that. Like you go to mythology and the heroes are just that strong. They don't really need to level up ever. That didn't survive in the stories that have passed down to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I absolutely think there's still a place to tell an entire story through the lens of a bunch of young women gossiping about the men in town. That's not going away from humanity.
Yeah. True. True.
but it is a little dry. The content is a little dry. I got a question for you.
Sure.
Define prose.
Prose is the use of words to convey your ideas. I suppose there's probably a more formal definition of it, but when I say prose, I am referring specifically to the way authors, and authors there are in the broad context, script writers, comic writers, stuff like that, use words and dialogue as is appropriate for their medium to convey their story. So obviously it's the largest concern for someone writing a novel, but even if you're writing a movie, your prose, the way your characters talk in that movie, is a part of it.
Oh, so you're lumping dialogue into prose.
Yes, I think prose covers all parts of
Okay,
verbal
it's a very
communication.
broad definition, but that's fine. Side note, I actually, if you've read any of my look aheads or anything, I know you haven't picked up any of my books yet, which you should. I write natural dialogue. I will even include ums and uhs and probably space fillers like that, because I think that those words carry meaning in reality. Like even has meaning. It implies that the character doesn't know what they're about to say quite yet, and they need a moment without someone cutting in. A lot of people cringe if they see a space filler in written dialogue, and they think that you should absolutely not do that.
Yeah, and see, that is what I would consider a prose decision. Are you going to put a space filler in or not? And I think that they have their place, but it's also not something I would want to use as much as people do in normal conversation. Because even if you just went back and you listened to this video, we've both said and a lot, and like nobody wants to read that much, but there is value to it at times.
So anyways, the point I was trying to make before I got distracted with that is there's an so prose is how you are conveying what you're trying to convey, like the quality of it. And the counter example I want to give is, I don't care how well you write someone screaming in anger, how gripping and how visceral and how well you do it, if what they're screaming about is getting the wrong order at a restaurant. The context of what you're trying to convey, 99 times out of 100, is going to override how well you say it.
Yes.
I think that is what drives the fact that we've talked previously when setting this up. We both kind of agree that the majority of prose all feels at about the same level. It's all kind of this mush of mid.
Yeah. And I think that's actually pretty fair to say about anything, but when you work a lot with it, it becomes much more apparent to you. The more you're down there in the guts working with the word choice in a story, the more you're like, well, I only think about maybe 100 words I write out of every 1,000, and the rest they're just sort of written on autopilot, right? The and conjunctions, stuff like that. They just sort of flow naturally with dialogue, and or sentence structure or grammar, and you don't think about them at all, assuming you think about grammar in the first place. I think your example of someone giving an order at a restaurant wrong, though, even that can serve as a moment that can be significant if that screwed up order at the restaurant.
Sure, but I was trying to give
the structure of a story.
A trivial thing.
Yeah. I mean,
how about this? I don't care how good you are at writing a fight sequence if it's the first page of the book.
Okay, that's fair. There are some people who would strongly contest that, though. They like their stories to open on an action beat, but
I will fight that to the day I die. If I don't know the characters, I don't care who wins the fight.
That's fair.
I will take that back for visual stories, because I'm totally fine with getting introduced to a story with spectacle. If you are starting the story with action to show me what I can expect later, that's fine. But books aren't really spectacle. So you have to start with something else.
Yeah, I can see that. And frankly, I prefer the strong opening image or a strong line of dialogue as opposed to some kind of spectacle myself. Although you can take that too far. I don't know if you've ever read or tried to read Ivanhoe.
Not familiar.
That book opens on like a 5-page long description. It's at least that's my memory. I haven't tried to read it in a long time, but when I tried to, I like just hit this wall of extremely detailed description. I was just like, I can't get past this. And I can understand why you would write it in that time period, because people back then didn't have a vast visual library of things to draw on, so that they could know. He couldn't just say, he was dressed in this kind of clothing and understand what it looked like necessarily. So he took a lot of time describing things, but it's one of those things that I don't know if it has as much merit in the modern age as it did when it was written.
I think there's something interesting to be said that a skill an author can improve and shouldn't necessarily use all the time is the amount of information they can convey per word. And the better you get, the more experience you get with writing and reading more try hard prose at times, you can pick up some tips and tricks of ways of how to rearrange things so that you get all of the information across quicker. And people will usually say that's good prose, that this was written well, and they'll usually also say it was paced fast, even though no one really knows what pacing is.
No, it is a complete mystery to everyone. It's kind of like the Supreme Court in pornography. You know it when you see it, but no one can really define it.
I want to give a counterexample to that Ivanhoe, because you're aware that I have my book club, right?
Yeah.
This month is Elric of Melniboné. The first installment of Elric is like 2 pages of him sitting on a throne doing nothing.
Interesting.
It works perfectly.
I have been told that Moorcock is a master of description and quick moving world building. And I think...
I am very envious. He does it very well. I'm only about 100 pages in. I'm a little behind for the club.
Yeah. He's on my TBR because I had we mentioned behind the scenes briefly that one editor I've worked with and really liked was Kat Rocha. And she recommended Moorcock to me because some of the things I was struggling with, she thought she could reading him would really help me improve.
Ooh, I'm jealous. I have asked everyone who reads my books, recommend me a book that does my weaknesses well. And I've never gotten a good answer to that question because it's a very difficult question.
Yeah. And in this case, I was specifically struggling as we were having our wrap-up consultation. There were parts of the feedback she gave me that I was really struggling with working out how to do. And that's when she recommended it to me. So it's on my TBR. It's really something I need to look at soon. But how it is.
If you joined my book club, you'd have the reason to read it.
There you go.
Come on. I even do end of the month live streams where indies come on and talk about the book and get a chance to shill their stuff. Come on, it's a win-win.
Sure, there you go. Everyone should know the Krake Book Club. Great thing. I haven't gotten off my butt and actually read one of them in time with the reading yet, though. So
I'm going to be picking shorter books. As much as I liked Catch-22 last month, I do think Catch-22 is a 10 out of 10. Way too long.
That's another long one. Yeah.
Okay. So I got another subject on prose that is not controversial. It's just almost a point of discussion, I guess. I view there to be such a thing as like mechanical prose. And a long time ago, I was trying to do an essay on how to write scenes well, because some other authors I knew were struggling. They were like, well, James, you do it really well. Just explain it. And one of the things I said was that you have to sequence the order of information correctly so that the reader knows the options available. And the example I used was supposed to be like a trivial example of you can't have an assassin jump out from behind the trees to attack the protagonist if you didn't say that there were trees.
Yeah.
So that is like the first hurdle. And I would actually go so far as to say if an aspiring author is making those kinds of errors, they are not fit to publish because they're just so obviously necessary to do.
Hmm.
And it's once you get past that, you start getting into the like, well, are you describing this in a way that evokes fear, or did you actually describe this character that's supposed to be the love interest? Did you describe her in an attractive manner? Can you sense, did anyone figure out that the animosity between these two characters is only between those two, and everyone else likes that guy?
Yeah, I can see that. Do you have like a line where it gets too granular? Like let me give a similar example to the one you used. Like say you have a person in a fight scene in a bar, right? And somebody is hiding under a table and kicks a chair out to trip them. Do you have to say they were close to a table then, or do you think that's being too granular with your setup?
Um, it depends on the bar, I would say.
Okay.
Uh, and that kind of comes into the scene setup, right? But like before the fight, I've definitely been in bars that are practically restaurants, and you can expect that there are tables everywhere.
Hmm.
But I've also been in standing room only bars where there are no tables.
No tables. Okay. Yeah.
And that should be covered in showing the scene prior to the fight, just so you can get people grounded into the story. You can't kick a chair into someone out on a dance club, for example.
Right. Right. Yeah. A fight scene in the middle of a dance club would be a completely different beast. Um, I've been thinking about this a little bit myself because I have the story I'm working on right now. A Candle in the Wind has like the entire second half essentially takes place in a lighthouse. So I went to the level of getting out graph paper and graphing out the entire lighthouse just
Sure.
so I'd have an idea of, because it's vertical and there's also like cramped quarters in some places and other places it's wide open. So I wanted like a really solid vision of that, but I don't do that in general for an action scene. So like how in detail would you get for that?
So I do write a fantasy web novel that has had so many fight sequences at this point. However, the fights are usually out in the open. Uh, all right, so here's an example. I'm going to redact some details from. At one point, one of the girls, one of the main character's friends, gets stabbed in a bar by surprise. I did establish that like the minstrels are in the bar, and one of them, and so that there, and he comes walking over, and then it's a surprise stabbing, and the main character retaliates by grabbing the guy's head and smashing it through a coat peg.
Okay.
I did not say that the bar has coat pegs. I just took that as I think that's a fair assumption. No one's really going to be surprised. And everyone also should realize at this point that this guy has 1,000 ways he could kill somebody. This was just a dramatic way because the girl he likes got stabbed right in front of him. In a fancy setting, people need a place to hang their cloaks and stuff. I took that as good enough. No one should question that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't see a problem with that either. It is something I wonder about though. Oftentimes you will see novels that go like one direction and they don't describe any of that kind of setup. Like you said, they don't mention there are trees to jump out of. But there are occasionally, and they are rare, which so at least that's something. You find those novels where they describe how many leaves are on the trees, and you're like, okay, you did a little bit too far there.
A little bit.
Um, okay. Uh,
So my rule of thumb is you don't necessarily need to visually paint the picture all the time. Although a lot of people you benefit from doing that, but you need to understand the choices available to people. Uh, the example that keeps popping into my head is from my second book, Ship of Fools. The main character is basically Master Chief,
mhm,
and he gets in a fight with a bunch of civilians at one point. There's no chance that Master Chief loses a fight to a squad of civilians.
right.
But I had previously set up that his armor has basically an access hatch where he keeps a pistol.
Hmm.
And while they're mobbing him, he's just trying to talk them down the whole time until they open that hatch. And he's like, unacceptable. Nope,
Right.
we're done talking. And then it's like smash cut to after the fight, they're all dead. Now that was something I had to set up because I had to justify the reaction because he could not allow them access to that. It's not that his life was in danger. It's That's where his transponder is. That's where his dog tag is. That's where the pistol is. Not having it. And if the reader isn't familiar with that, they view that as this wild, sadistic overreaction.
Right. One thing I have noticed is continuing down the line of action scenes, because this seems like a really interesting discussion, is that a lot of writers, when they write a fight, they only write what people are doing. They don't write anything that's going through the characters' heads. And part of me wants to say that's because a lot of people have never even been in a fist fight. But I think part of it is too, like they're in a movie mindset. You just see what the people are doing. Do you think that's a failure of prose, or that's more of a story structure thing?
I think it depends. So I was a fencer back in college.
Okay.
And I definitely hit a skill ceiling. I was not even close to the best fencer on the team. I was good, but not the best. And part of the problem was that I couldn't set things up well. And like every coach I ever talked to was just like, you need to learn how to use your attack to force them to attack back incorrectly so that you can actually score the point.
Right.
And I just couldn't time the body language correctly. So even though that's like the way that a better fencer does that, I was stuck at the level of just go faster and hit them, which works often. Most brawls, nobody has the time to think ahead. It is simply action reaction, and you take the opportunities given to you. And in a real fight, one good hit wins the fight. And often you just have idiots. Like the one fist fight I've been a part of, there wasn't a single good punch swung. There were people like doing this, trying to knock on each other's skulls, and it was rather pathetic, actually.
Right, or doing the windmill thing when they're spinning their fists, Yeah.
I think that's an important thing. Is 99.something% of the population doesn't actually know how to fight. Even most martial artists don't know how to fight. The internet has proven that if you put someone who's a trained martial artist against a large man with a beer in him and anger, who do you think wins?
Yeah. Well, it's like, have you ever seen some of the medieval qualifications for being a sword master?
Ooh, give me some examples.
I forget. I think it was the Lichtenauer system. They said you were a master when you had fenced and beaten 3 fencing masters, when you had fenced and beaten 3 brave men with no training, and when you had fenced and beaten 3 drunk men. That made you a master.
Yeah. Some people are aware of how important drugs are to warfare. They're very important.
But I think I had something else I was going to say. Another thing people forget about, like, the real world fight is there's always more than one person. Like, even if you only see one person, in the back of your mind, there's another guy. Like, what if he has another guy?
Not necessarily. You can actually really justify a lot of like gang fights are often not really about the one person getting attacked, because genuinely it's about the status within the gang, and that's why there isn't typically groin shots or eye gouging or anything. People
that too, yeah.
Even in street fights, you have to abide by certain behavior, or you aren't going to keep your rapport with the other people in the crowd. Now, things that you obviously have examples of just like mob violence, which breaks down, and some stories will revolve around that. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to have one-on-one fights.
Yeah. Well, no, I think one-on-one fights can happen like
even surrounded by a crowd. I mean,
yeah,
I've got one of them in this book.
Very nice. So we also talked about editing a little bit. What do you think? What kind of editing do you think the indie writer needs the most in most cases?
So there are 2 types of editors, right? Copy editors and developmental editors.
Right.
If you need a copy editor, is dependent on your ability to technically write. I have a pretty high, or sorry, I have a very low error rate. And then from that low error rate, my beta readers catch most of what I left in the document. And usually that's like, I'm typing the character's name and the first 2 letters are capitalized. Like those are the kind of errors I make.
Yeah.
So at the final book, I have 3 to 5 typos in the book. And to get those fixed would be several $100s.
Right.
Gotta be honest, that's not money well spent. Now, there are other people that have, a typo per page.
Sure.
$300 in copy editing is money well spent for them. So I say there's no shame in copy editing. It depends on you, and don't trust Grammarly.
Yeah. Truer words were never spoken.
But copy editing is a very mechanical thing. They shouldn't be changing anything about what you're trying to write. That's where developmental editing and line editing, it's a little blurry there. That's where that comes in. And from all the people I've worked with, all the authors I've spoken with, all the editors I've tried out, and even people I've paid, there are editors that can vastly improve your story. They are aware of how valuable their service is, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you find somebody on Fiverr trying to do it for cheap, they are worthless 9 times out of 10. And I really want readers to understand that books don't make much money, which means there isn't much revenue to fund that editor. And like a developmental editor is almost a writer themselves, which kind of raises the question of why would you hire someone who isn't a successful author? And if they are a successful author, why would they be editing? That's why there's so few of them. That's why they can charge so much. Clearly there are better writers and better skill, and you can learn things from these people. It's just that I'm willing to bet anyone in the Iron Age has not generated enough revenue off one of their books to pay off both the cover art, their marketing, and a proper developmental editor. There just is not that much money. And this seal of approval of, it went through an editor doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, especially in a community that is very much about independently created stuff. I can see that. Yeah. And I think that is like, I think the Iron Age is a fun place with a lot of energy and ideas. But as I said in, the video previously where I talked about some of your reviews, I think one of the things that is, once some of that energy burns off, you're going to have to look at what's left and be like, yeah, we do need to think about developing and refining things. Like you can only have wrought iron for so long. Sooner or later, you got to temper it into steel to really start building something. And I don't know how long it's going to take. It's probably not going to be, in the next couple of years. But I think you're starting to see some groups that are kind of building the process needed for that. I think the only one that's really hit it with any consistency is the editorial and development team at Iconic Comics. I know they're a controversial bunch, but they have really dialed in their quality levels, at least storytelling wise, over the last year or so. So
I'm not familiar with them. I'll take your word for it.
I'm
not actually that big into comics. I'm very much a manga guy. Although
that's
I have
fair.
Several independent comics on Kickstarter pre-order right now. So you'll see some reviews coming from me out of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that just as a matter of getting a schedule set up and working out editors with a decent grasp of storytelling who can, refine a story through that process. They've done the best at that so far of anyone I've seen.
Cool.
And I think it's important to have that, even though, also having the independent artist and their ideas is important. The sad reality is ideas are really cheap. Like
Yeah.
I have 5 ideas for stories every day, it seems like sometimes. And sitting down and turning those ideas into a story, that's the really hard part. Um, and I think that, yeah, editors, and especially developmental editors, because I am kind of hoping that a lot of that line editing stuff, Grammarly doesn't cut it now, but soon, I think you'll have something that can do a lot of that ticky tack stuff for you
Yeah.
very easily.
ChatGPT 4 is going to be a perfect copy editor.
You think so?
Yeah. Yeah. You want to make a gentleman's bet?
Sure. Yeah. Name a book that I have to read if GPT-4 can give you a perfect copy of it, and I'll read it.
Okay, not right now. I'll come up with something. Because I
Okay.
could just do like the low ball. You gotta review one of my books. But I might inflict something worse on you.
Oh no. Yeah, you could find one of those really terrible romance novels everyone talks about. And
Yeah, I could pick a Colleen Hoover book.
oh no, I've heard about this person. I don't know very much about her myself.
Colleen Hoover is actually really interesting because even though the plots are absolute trash, the characters are reprehensible. The prose is basic. There is still the fundamental appeal to the story. She hits very well.
Okay.
For the record, I've only read Verity by her. I want to smack her with the what's the handbook of psychological illnesses?
Oh, DSM.
Yeah, I want to smack her with the DSM because she doesn't understand how mental illness works at all, and her entire plot is completely broken because of this ignorance. But you are crazy if you think there isn't fundamental appeal to her stories.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are like they understand what the appeal of their genre is, and they really don't care if it's a complete flight of fancy to get that appeal. You know, and they do. Sadly, they do pretty well. They do pretty well.
It's a weird thing, ain't it?
Yeah. Now, I will say that if GPT-4 is not a perfect line editor, I will have you read Stephen Hunt's Court of the Air, because I like making people read that book because it's like a drug trip.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Okay.
Sure. All right. We got it in recording.
All right. Yeah, we're locked in now.
Caveat: it has to be that we're talking about the free version of ChatGPT 4 when that eventually exists. I ain't paying for ChatGPT 4.
That is fair. Yeah. No one should have to pay for that, considering that they got it all for free. Anyway. Yeah. So editing, prose. Was there anything else you want to talk about? Maybe you have something you want to tell people went on sale recently.
Yeah. Let's set me up there. I've had this sitting under my face this whole time of the cyberpunk guy. I really want to stress people what I'm trying to do with my main series is I love the cyberpunk genre, but I feel like it's become just an aesthetic because it was generated in the 80s when computers were just getting created. And it was really, there was a lot of themes about international corporations and such, and capitalism, and the disenfranchisement of the individual, and all that stuff. Some of that manifested, a lot didn't. We have very different fundamental concerns in the world today in 2023, as we're surrounded by all the trappings of cyberpunk. We have holograms. We have flying cars. We have artificial intelligences. We have corporations hiring hit squads to overthrow governments. Investment firms are funding international war. Like, name something in cyberpunk, and I will point to it in reality. And yet the genre is just stuck in the neon lights and the gasoline spill, right? So I am trying to drag out all the nice things of what created the genre, why people like the genre, but update it to understand the influences of like the internet. Like, name a cyberpunk book that, you know, I've got Ghost in the Shell back there. None of them imagined social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I am fascinated with the genre, and it occupies way too much of my brain, which is why my main series is the Bastion Blackstone series, which is a detective series. It does have a great A plot of it's a manhunt dual perspective where the detective is trying to find this kid that brained another kid with a beer bottle. That's the inciting incident, and things just get out of hand with the undercity gangs and government politics and giant robot fights. And I have a blast with it because the genre is just so fun, and it's available now. So how's that for a pitch?
All right. That sounds pretty interesting. Hopefully somebody will take you up on that. And for my part, I encourage everyone to check out Anvil Magazine #2. I have a short story appearing in that called The Shadowed Canal.
I've got the little poster back there.
There you go.
Anvil Magazine could be really good. I'm concerned about that he eliminated the advertisements, though.
Well, you know, yeah, he did that for Media Mail, and I don't know. Media Mail is a little bit capricious in what they let through. So hopefully that's a good
what
trade-off.
happened to Sursova?
Hmm?
Sursova magazine or anthologies or whatever?
No, what happened there?
He tried mailing checks out to his contributors, and someone in the mailroom ripped them open and sold his bank routing info.
Wow.
And he has he isn't getting anywhere with trying to get them arrested because that's a felony.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's a federal felony.
Yeah. If the postmaster doesn't care, then you're screwed.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, the post office, I mean, it does a lot of good work for a lot of people, but when it goes bad, it goes bad. But yeah, so check out those two things. I will include links to both in the description below. And thank you for your time, James. It's been fun talking to you.
It was great chatting. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. And to the audience, I'll talk to you later.